guards had their weapons drawn before I even finished speaking. I could feel it the moment the words left my mouth. Not a bad translation, not a cultural slip. Something I had said landed wrong, and the entire throne hall of the Velcon Dominion shifted into a different kind of silence. The kind that comes before a decision. The kind where every living creature in the room holds still because moving might remind the most powerful person in the galaxy that you exist. My name is Claire Donahue. I am 34 years old. I grew up in a small town in rural England where the biggest political drama of my childhood was an argument over whose cows were eating whose hedgerow. I have a degree in xenolinguistics from Cambridge, a secondary qualification in interstellar diplomacy from the Geneva Accord Institute, and I have spent the last 11 years of my career working my way up to a single moment that was, by every measure, now going catastrophically wrong. I was the first human being ever granted a solo audience with Queen Velsora. I was also, it seemed, approximately 40 seconds away from being the last. The hall was made of something that looked like black stone but breathed faintly, the way lungs breathe, barely visible, enough to notice if you were staring too hard at the walls and trying not to stare at the queen. The Velcon are bioluminescent, semi-corporeal beings. When they are calm, they glow a steady, cool violet. When they are displeased, the light sharpens. It gets colder. Every courtier in that hall had shifted from violet to a hard, pale blue, and the guards, 12 of them, had raised their resonance lances and were pointing the ends at my chest. Velsora herself had not moved. She sat on a throne that was not quite a throne, more of a focal point, a place in the room that was simply more important than the others, and she had her 4 arms folded and her star-bright eyes fixed on me with an expression I had spent years studying and could still not fully read. I had said, "We are not here to impress you, we are here because we want to be." That was the sentence. I had rehearsed it. I had run it through the diplomatic language models 17 times. Every projection had come back green, and yet here were 12 resonance lances and a hall full of cold blue light. My earpiece clicked. The voice of Owen Bassett, our senior mission coordinator, came through from the ship in orbit, quiet and very controlled. "Claire, do not move. Do not speak. We are trying to figure out what just happened." I did not move. I did not speak. I breathed through my nose and looked straight ahead and thought, with the particular clarity that arrives when your body has accepted it might be about to stop working, about what had gone wrong. The Velcon do not want things. That was the problem. Wanting is a concept so bound up in scarcity, in need, in the idea that you do not have enough, that a civilization this old had excised it from their cultural framework entirely. The word I had used, the closest galactic standard equivalent for desire and intention combined, carried an undertone in Velcon dialect that meant hunger. That meant desperation. That meant, in the symbolic language of a species that had not been desperate in 400 years, a threat. I had told the queen of the oldest empire in the galaxy that humanity was hungry. The silence held another 5 seconds, then 10. Then Velsora stood. She had never stood during an audience. I knew this because I had read every documented record of a Velcon royal audience going back 260 years, and in every single one, the queen remained seated. It was not protocol. It was simply what happened, the same way gravity is simply what happens, a feature of the room rather than a choice. She descended the 3 steps from the dais. The guards did not lower their weapons. They tracked her movement with the same mechanical readiness, aimed at me, waiting. She walked toward me, and I made the calculation that moving backward was worse than holding still, so I held still. She stopped close enough that I could feel the warmth coming off her, which surprised me, because the briefing documents had not mentioned warmth. They had mentioned light. They had mentioned the neural merging phenomenon that made physical contact between Velcon tantamount to full psychological exposure, where 2 minds briefly became one and every hidden thing floated to the surface. They had mentioned that the queen could initiate this contact unilaterally, and that historically, for non-Velcon, the results had been described with a great deal of careful, diplomatic euphemism. She was looking at me with an expression that had shifted, slightly, from the cold readiness of moments ago, to something I had no word for. She said, in English, which she should not have known, which she had clearly learned specifically for this moment, "You want to be here." I swallowed. Yes. Why? It was not a question exactly. It was more like a door, left slightly open, with no indication of what was on the other side. I thought about the careful answer, the diplomatic answer, prepared and rehearsed and sitting in my memory like a document ready to print. I thought about the 11 years of work that had led to this room, this moment, this woman standing 4 feet in front of me with cold blue light in her skin, and 12 weapons aimed at my chest. Then I thought about my mother, who had a habit of waking up every morning and walking out to her garden before she made tea, just to stand in it for a few minutes. I had asked her once what she was doing. She had said she was making sure it was still there. I had been about 8 years old and had found this completely reasonable. I said, because the stars have been there our whole lives, and we have been looking at them, and it seemed wrong to keep looking and never go. The room stayed very quiet. Velsora tilted her head, a gesture so recognizably curious that it crossed the entire distance between our biologies without any translation needed. Then she opened her arms. All 4 of them, the upper pair and the lower pair, spread wide, palms forward. Every being in that court stopped making any sound at all, not the polite silence of a formal proceeding, the stunned silence of 47 alien delegations watching something happen that had no historical precedent in any record they could access. The guards did not move. The courtiers did not move. The Dravathi ambassador, who had briefed me that morning with quiet superiority about everything I was going to do wrong, stood with his mouth slightly open. They knew what the gesture meant for a Velcon. An invitation to contact. An invitation to merging. She was offering me her mind the way you might offer someone a seat, openly, without coercion, and the entire court was waiting for me to be undone by it. I looked at her. She had 4 arms open and star-bright eyes, and she had learned 1 English sentence and used it back at me, and she was waiting. I stepped forward and put my arms around her. She was warm. That was the first thing. Warmer than I expected, warmer than the room, a steady, quiet heat that radiated through the light. Her arms came around me, all 4 of them, the upper 2 at my shoulders, the lower 2 around my back, and they were careful in a way I had not expected. Not tight, not a grip. Careful, the way you hold something that you are not sure how fragile it is. I felt her go still. I knew what she was waiting for. The merging, the flood of psychic information, the complete and involuntary exposure of every thought, every memory, every private thing that a person is. The Velcon experience it as a kind of shattering, even with their own kind, even when they choose it. With a non-Velcon, the historical accounts described it as an event. What happened instead was nothing. No merging, no psychic cascade, no flood of information, no dissolution of edges, just my heartbeat, which had settled to about 90 beats per minute, and my body temperature at 37 degrees, and the very simple and very human weight of 2 arms doing what arms are built to do. I felt, very faintly, her hold tighten. We stayed like that for a long moment, long enough that the silence in the court began to change texture, moving from stunned to something else, something edged with a collective confusion so total it was almost visible. Then Velsora pulled back. She stepped away. She looked at me. Her bioluminescence was doing something that none of her courtiers had seen before, cycling through colors at the edge of the documented spectrum, colors her own people did not have specific words for because they had not occurred in any recorded context. She said, still in English, with something in her voice that I would later spend weeks trying to name, "You have no signal." "No," I said, "we don't. Nothing reaches." "Nothing reaches," I agreed. "And yet," she said, and stopped. She turned and walked back to her dais. She did not rush. She moved with the same calm gravity as always. She sat. Her light steadied, settling from those unnamed edge colors back toward violet, a deeper violet than before, something richer. She raised one hand, and every weapon in the room lowered. She said, in galactic standard so the whole court could hear, "The Earth delegation is elevated, effective this hour, from Category 4 observer to Category 1 peer. Full voting rights in the Congress. Full diplomatic standing under Dominion protection. Full hospitality of this court." The room did not erupt. It did not cheer. It simply released a breath it had been holding for the last 10 minutes, and in the specific quality of that release, I could hear the shape of everything that had just changed. Owen's voice came back into my earpiece, quiet and slightly unsteady. "Claire, whatever you did, it worked." I did not answer him. I bowed to the Queen, as protocol required, and I kept my face composed, and I thought about my mother standing in her garden in the early morning, making sure it was still there. Later, in the small antechamber off the main hall, I was brought something warm to drink by a Velcon attendant who moved with such careful deference that I found it briefly alarming. Owen came down from orbit within the hour. He walked in, looked at me for a long moment, and sat down across from me without saying anything at first. Then he said, "The Dravathi ambassador wants to know what happened. The Oshari delegation has filed a formal inquiry with the Congress, asking for an explanation of the Queen's decision. 3 of the Kun Collective's component bodies apparently had to go lie down. What did you tell them? Nothing yet. He turned his cup in his hands. I was hoping you could explain it to me first. I looked at the wall for a moment. Through it, I could still hear the faint, distant sounds of the court reassembling itself into some new configuration that could hold what had just happened. She touched me, I said, expecting to know me. Everything about me, all at once. That is what touching means for them. It is not a gesture. It is a complete exchange of selves. She was going to judge me from the inside out, the way she judges every species she encounters. And instead, she got a heartbeat. I set my cup down. She got body heat and the smell of recycled ship air and 2 arms holding on. No signal. No merging. No information cascade. Just a person. Being a person. The way we have always been people, which is quietly, without any of the frequencies that the rest of the galaxy transmits on. Owen was quiet for a long moment. So we won a Category 1 standing because we are, he paused, neurologically boring. We won a Category 1 standing, I said, because she has spent 400 years in contact with minds, and this was the first time she touched something that did not immediately tell her everything, and ask for something in return. I picked up my cup again. We were just there, present, without agenda leaking through our skin. She said we have no signal. And that was good? I thought about it. I think she has been very tired for a very long time, I said, and she did not know it until she held something quiet. Owen looked at me for a long time. Then he nodded slowly, once, and looked away, and I knew he was doing what I was doing, which was trying to find a framework large enough to contain what had happened and realizing, gradually, that no such framework existed yet, and we would simply have to build one. 3 days later, I was given a second audience, a private one, without the court, without the guards, without the 47 delegations arranged in their semicircular tiers watching every breath I took. Just the Queen, in a smaller room, with afternoon light coming through a window that looked out over the Velcon capital, a city that stretched to every horizon in colors I still did not have names for. She said, "Explain to me how you do it." "Do what?" "Exist," she said, "without knowing each other." I thought about that for a while. "We talk," I said. "We ask. We guess, sometimes. We get it wrong a lot. We have books and letters and songs that try to explain one person to another, and they are never quite accurate, and we write more anyway." I paused. "We hug. We hold on to each other when things are difficult. It does not transfer information. It just says, you are not alone in this." She was quiet. "That seems," she said carefully, "very inefficient." "Extremely," I agreed. "We are also very bad at directions, very slow to learn from our mistakes, and we have a habit of making important decisions based on how we feel on a given afternoon. We are genuinely not an impressive species by most measurable standards." "And yet," she said, for the second time. I smiled. "And yet." She looked out the window at her city. Her light was that richer violet again, the one I had started to understand meant something close to contemplation. She was quiet for long enough that I began to wonder if the conversation was over. Then she said, "My advisors believe I elevated your delegation because the gesture disarmed me. They believe it was calculated. That a species cunning enough to read our culture that precisely must be useful to have as an ally. What do you believe?" She turned back to look at me with those star-bright eyes. "I believe," she said, "that you simply stepped forward because someone opened their arms, and it did not occur to you not to." I did not answer. She almost smiled. I could see the edge of it. "That is much more interesting," she said. I flew home 14 months later, when the first round of formal treaty negotiations were complete, and my replacement, a very capable diplomat named Patrick Greaves, was settled in, and had successfully navigated 3 audiences without incident. I sat in the transport window on the way out of the system and watched the Velcon capital shrink to a point of light among other points of light. Owen was asleep across the aisle. The rest of the team was quiet. I thought about a civilization 400 years old, wealthy beyond any human framework for understanding wealth, powerful in ways that made our entire species look like something that had just learned to use tools. I thought about a queen who had spent centuries reaching into the minds of every species she encountered and reading them like documents, and who had touched a human woman expecting the same, and found instead a heartbeat and a warm jacket and 2 arms that held on, because that is simply what arms do. I thought about my mother standing in her garden every morning, making sure it was still there. We are not an impressive species. That is simply the truth. We are slow and fragile and neurologically isolated, and we get lost easily, and we feel everything more than is perhaps practical, and we cry at films, and we stay up too late, and we make the same mistakes across generations with a consistency that would be embarrassing if we were not so sincere about it. But we show up, we open our arms, we hold on. And apparently, in a galaxy full of minds that know each other too well and too fast and without asking, that is the strangest and most remarkable thing there is. I closed my eyes somewhere past the outer marker of the Velcon system and slept better than I had in 14 months, and when I woke up, the stars through the window were the stars I had grown up under, small and quiet and there, the same ones that had always been there, the ones my grandmother had watched from her garden, and her grandmother before her. We had been looking at them all our lives. It had seemed wrong to keep looking and never go,